So, okay, so everything's good. Yes. Ladies and gentlemen, unless Omar wants to introduce, do you want to introduce me, Omar? Do you want to introduce me? You're muted. Omar's muted. Do you
Do
want
you
to
hear me?
introduce me? Or I'll introduce myself.
So do you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, and all assembled company, welcome to the World Storytelling Cafe. It's Friday, and it's time for stories. And today we have a special guest, ladies and gentlemen. We have the greatest storyteller and the artistic director of the Festival of Marrakesh, Mr. John Rowe. So the floor is yours, Mr. John.
Thank you very much, Omar. It's fantastic. It's great to be here at this festive occasion. Well, it's a sort of months of festivities. I've been um I've been donning my red suit and been on a train through the Forest of Dean, uh, dispensing goodwill and tidings and such. And so I thought I'd come and tell a story, uh, or two, or three. So I'm going to start with one was from Lapland, and it's about a fox called Miko, and it's from way back in time when forests were thicker, mountains were taller, and rivers were deeper, and all the animals could talk to each other, and chickens still had teeth. And there was a fox called Miko. Now, Miko was the naughtiest fox in the whole world. He was always playing tricks, especially on his friend Otso, the bear. Well, it was winter and it was snowing. I know Omar does not get snow in Marrakesh, but his friend Zuhair, who came to Ireland 2 weeks ago, experienced snow for the first time in his life. It was, and I was there, and it was. Cork never has snow, but they put on a show, especially a special snowstorm for Zuhair, for his benefit. Um, so it's true, Alistair. It was all because of Zuhair, that snow. Anyway, it was snowing, and it's sort of, but well, if anyone has been to Lapland in the winter, it's always snowing. And the snow got thicker and thicker and thicker. And Miko thought, I'm going to have some fun. So he he got a shovel and he went out and he dug a big hole in the snow. And he climbed inside. He just had his nose sticking out. And he waited and he waited and he waited. But nothing happened. So he waited and he waited and he waited. But nothing happened. So he waited and he waited and he waited, and suddenly he heard in the distance a bell. He stuck his head out the hole and he looked down the road, and round the corner came a reindeer with a bell round its neck, and that reindeer was pulling a sleigh, and on that sleigh was a reindeer man. And behind that sleigh were 4 sledges, and the first sledge was full of wooden toys, and the second sledge was full of furs, and the third sledge was full of wood for the fire, but the fourth sled was full of fish. And if there's one thing that foxes like, it's fish. And Miko thought, I'm going to have some of that. So he climbed up his hole and he lay in the road, stiff as a board. And the reindeer man looked down and thought, there's a frozen fox in the road. I think I'm going to sell that at the market. And he picked Miko up and put him on the sled full of wooden toys. set off down the road. You know what Miko did? He rolled and he rolled and he rolled and he fell off into the ground with a thud. Reindeer man looked down, picked him up, and put him on the sled full of furs. Set off down the road. You know what Miko did? He rolled and he rolled and he rolled and he fell off onto the ground with a thud. This time he was put on the sled full of wood for the fire. And Miko rolled and he rolled and he rolled and he fell off on the ground with a thud. Finally, he got put on the sled full of fish, which was exactly where he wanted to be. So when the reindeer man started going down the road, Miko leant forward and he chewed through the rope that held that sled onto the one in front. So when the reindeer man got to market, he had a sled full of wooden toys, a sled full of furs, a sled full of logs for the fire, but he didn't have a sled full of fish. So he went as fast as he could back down the road. Of course, it was slippery and it was snowing. It took him some time. And he found his sled in the middle of the road, but it was utterly empty. And he went back to market and he sold what he could. But in the middle of the forest was Miko, looking at a great pile of fish, looking forward to a nice fish supper. When along came his friend Otso the bear, and this is absolutely true. In those days, bears had big, long, fluffy tails. It was so beautiful that he didn't even look forward when he was going. He would just look over his shoulder thinking, oh, what a beautiful tail I've got. Oh, fantastic. Oh, what an amazing tail. Oh, how magnificent I am, when he smelt something. Louis, what do you think he smelt?
Fish!
The fish. Where did you get where'd you get those fish from? said Otso. Well, to tell you the truth, said Miko, I went down to the river and I cut a big hole in the ice. And Norman's nodding because there is a Canadian version of this, but of course, it probably came across with a few Scandinavians. Cut a hole in the ice, and I let my tail down into the cold, cold water, and all the fish came and held onto my tail. And when I stood up, I picked the fish off my tail, and that's those fish you see there. Why don't you trot? I think I will, said Otso. And he went down, he cut a big hole in the ice. And he let his tail down to the cold, cold water. And he waited, and he waited, and he waited. But nothing happened. So he waited, and he waited, and he waited. But nothing happened. So he waited, and he waited, and he waited. He thought, I've had enough of this. It's getting a bit cold, even if you've got fur on your bottom. You know, if you sit on ice, it will penetrate. So he went to stand up. Oh no, he was stuck on the ice, and he pulled and he pulled and he pulled, but nothing happened. So he pulled and he pulled and he pulled, but nothing happened. So he pulled and he pulled, and pop! His big, beautiful tail had pulled off into the ice. And if you look at bears this very day, they've only got that little short stub of a tail, and it's all Miko, the fox's fault. Or at least, Norman, that is what I heard. Well, let's go across. Well, we could stay in Scandinavia. Now, this is a story I'm just working on at the moment, and but I like it. It's called Christmas Rose, and I'm trying to do stuff that is vaguely seasonal. I probably won't keep it up for the whole set, but there was in the Going Forest in Sweden a robber family. There was robber mother, there was robber father, and there were the 5 robber children. And Robber Father was not allowed down into the villages surrounding the mountain. He had to live in the forest, because if he'd come down, he would have been arrested and probably hung. And he made his living attacking wayfarers, people that strayed into the forest. But when it got a bit thin, like it did in the winter, and people had heard about him, so they steered clear. And pickings were a little thin. Robber Mother went down to the village with the children, each with a sack as long as themselves on their back, and went down begging. Now, this was well, put it this way: if they lived in this day and age, they would be sanctioned for continuous antisocial behavior. But so when Robber Mother knocked on a door and asked for food, no one dared refuse her, because not only her, but the 5 children would have wreaked havoc. And they came to a cloister, and she knocked on the door of the cloister. She told her children, obviously, to stay where they were and not misbehave, but that was like herding cats, I suppose. And the little door of the little window slid open the cloister, and 5 loaves were put into a basket. She went to find her children, and one of the children were tugging her at the skirt, saying, come, look at this, look at this. And they'd been like telling water not to be wet. That's much better, Mr. Bubba. See. Anyway, the children sort of led her through the gate into the cloister garden. There was a little herb garden surrounded by a great wall. Oh, it was beautiful. The flowers in them. I mean, it was fantastic. And Robber Mother, she smiled. She was walking between all the herbs and the little paths. And this herb garden was it was the pride and joy of Abbot Hans. And it was being looked after by a lay brother. And he was the one that had left the gate open. He was very worried. There was Robber Mother with these 5 out of control children wandering about in the Abbot Hans' beautiful herb garden. And he went up and said, "What are you doing here? Get out, get out. Women aren't allowed in here." And, she took no notice, of course. And he said, don't you know this garden is owned by is the pride and joy of Abbot Hans? Get out. And she looked at him and she said, "I will get out in my own time." And she stared at him, the sort of stare that would have frozen most people, to have chilled most people to the bone. Couldn't have been more powerful if she'd been the Queen of Denmark. So the young lay brother went back to get a bit of help from in the cloisters, and 2 monks came out and they grabbed her by the arms and they're shouting and she's screaming, and, "Don't you know what my husband will do to you if you lay your hands on me?" When Abbot Hans came out to see what all the fuss was about, he said, brothers, take your hands off that woman." And he looked at how she was peering at the herbs, and the light in her eyes, and the smile on her lips. And he spoke quietly to her. He said, "Did you ever see anything more beautiful than this herb garden?" And she said, "Well, I thought so when I first came in. But then I remembered another garden. And I tell you what, if you saw that, you'd pull up all your herbs and throw them into the road as if they were weeds." Of course, the lay brother is getting more and more upset. He looked after the abbot, and he hated to see the abbot's feelings hurt. But the abbot said, "Well, where can I see such a garden? Where can?" He said, "Well, have you heard on Christmas Eve in the Goying Forest how it is filled with flowers and fruit?" He said, "I've heard such stories. I tell you what, if I should be allowed to see it, I will make sure your whole family is looked after." Well, she wasn't quite sure whether she should sort of show off about the garden, but her pride was hurt. He said, "Well, if you come up with just yourself and one helper on Christmas Eve, I'll send someone down to get you. I'll let you see it." Well, as it happened, the Archbishop Absalom, who was a very strict man and would have made sure Robber Father was hung at the gallows should he have appeared, but the Abbot Hans said, "Well, why? I've been told I can see the Christmas garden." And the Archbishop said, that's just a legend. But if I could see it, will you write a letter of forgiveness for Robber Father so they can come down to the village and lead an honest life? And the Archbishop said, "Should I? Yeah, and I can't do that. I wouldn't let these people down there. They'll wreak havoc." And the Archbishop said, the Abbot said, "Look, if God has been thought it fit to show the Robber family these wonders, who are we to deny them?" And the Archbishop said, "All right, okay. If you can bring me one flower from the garden, I will willingly write a letter of forgiveness." Well, come Christmas Eve, a child is sent down from the robber's cave, and the old abbot and the lay brother took themselves up through the forest, past all the past all the churches that are being decorated, past the cottages with the log in the fire and the Yule log burning, up to the forest and into the cave. Robber Mother said, "Bring your horses in, or they'll freeze in the snow. Can I give you something to eat?" And the Abbot Hans said, "That's fine. We brought our own food." But to tell you the truth, he was that excited that he could hardly eat a thing. And the abbot and the old woman are sitting by the fire talking. Robber Father, of course, had the back to both of them and expressed angrily, "Are you here to take my wife and children away from me?" But he said, "No, I'll give you, if I see the garden, I've made this a bargain with Archbishop Absalom that you will have a letter of forgiveness. Well, if I get that, which I very much doubt," said Robber Baron, "I'll not steal so much as a goose for the rest of my life." Well, they waited and they waited and they waited. And suddenly they heard bells ringing. And they went out, and as the mist lifted, instead of snow was a green carpet of grass and moss and flowers poking through and butterflies flying round. And there was every kind of flower you could imagine. And birds and wild strawberries. And the children were eating the wild strawberries, and the bear came padding in, and Robber Father said, "Go away, find your own strawberries," to the bear. And the lay brother thought, this can't be true. This must be the work of the devil. And he sat there, he wasn't even smiling. And the abbot was trying to choose which flower to pick to take back for the archbishop, but every time one came up, there was another one came in that was more beautiful, and then a dove came down and was flying near his face. And as far as the archbishop, as far as the abbot was concerned, that was the angel going to sing. And just as the dove had nearly landed on him, the lay brother shouted, "This is the work of the devil. Go back where you came from." And instantly, everything started fading. The poor old hand, the abbot, dropped to his knees. I nearly was touching angel, and now they've gone. But he managed to grab one rose as he died. And his body was carried back. Robber father sent the young lay brother back, carrying on a horse with the body, abbot's body behind him. When he got back, his hand was prized open, and there was the rose. And the archbishop, he kept his word, and he sent a letter of forgiveness. And to tell you the truth, when the lay brother came up, he wasn't welcomed with the letter of forgiveness. He wasn't really welcomed into the cave. But when the letter was given to him, he came down, and he never stole so much as a goose for the rest of his life, and they lived a good life. But every Christmas, the bulb that was planted in the garden, in the herb garden, every Christmas, there's a rose grows. And every Christmas, the rose blooms. And that is the Christmas rose. And one day I'll have that story in my head properly. Every story needs working on. The only way to work on a story is to tell it. So
I think you rose to the occasion.
Thank you very much for that, Bubba C. We got through this far without a pun, but we couldn't get any further. Fantastic. So it is pantomime season. And amongst the great pantomimes is of course Cinderella. But as everyone knows,
excuse me for just a moment, John Rowe. Could you explain to the American you guys mean when you say pantomime and pantomime season? It means something different here in the States.
Well, pantomime is where you take a basic fairy story and you use it for a lot of jokes, and the men dress as women and the women dress as men, and there's always a really ugly woman who's the dame, or an ugly man who's the dame who dresses up, and there's a very beautiful young lady who becomes the principal boy, usually Prince Charming, and so forth. So it's full of bad jokes. You'd love it because it's full of puns, and there's jokes for the children, but they all have a double meaning. So the adults laugh at the other side of it. And it's probably something that wouldn't cross the Atlantic or to the south of the Canadian border. It wouldn't between Canada and Mexico, that little country that squeezes between the two.
Well, now that you've explained it, I think I can enjoy it even more.
Yeah,
Thank you.
so that-
And I'm going to do
so
the near
that-
impossible. I'm going to be quiet.
It's the sort of thing you wouldn't get. It would be like trying to explain to an immigration officer at Boston airport, and to crack a joke with them, and they explain that the world is very serious, and just entering your country is a serious business.
Yes.
So there's, but as we all know, as storytellers, the story the pantomime uses is a French version from the court of Louis XIV. But there are over 300 different versions of Cinderella. The earliest one is from ancient Egypt, from about 24 BC, and then another early one is from China, which is probably where the small feet came from. But this one actually was collected quite late. This was collected from an old gypsy woman, Romany woman in England in 1915, and not by me. This is so. It's Mossy Coat. Now, I love this version because it's how a girl and her mother conspire to get everything. And there's no victims. There's no girl victim in this story. So and it's from way back in time when my hair was dark and my beard was ginger and all my teeth were my own. And there was a girl. She was the most beautiful girl in the village. Everyone wanted to marry her, including the local tinker, the man that went from door to door selling and mending things. And every night he would bring her presents. Sometimes he would bring her earrings. Sometimes he would bring her a necklace. And sometimes he would bring her a bracelet. She loved the presents, but she didn't want to marry the man. So Mossy Coat, because that's what she's called in this story, went to her mum and said, "Mum, I love the present, but I don't want to marry the man." Mum said, "Don't worry about it. I'm making this petticoat." Now, for our younger listeners, a petticoat is a sort of underskirt that either kept you warm before women were allowed to wear trousers to work, or made your skirt or dress look full. That is, made it stand out a bit. I have to explain that these days because I go into schools a lot, and very few children know what a petticoat is. Alistair, I'm sure you found the same thing. And you're muted, Alistair. You're allowed to.
I don't often use the word petticoat when I'm in school. Sadly, I obviously need to learn. I apologize to everyone out there that I have failed in my mission to increase children's vocabulary.
We need to use these lost words because words are disappearing. I mean, from the children's dictionary, they took out blackberry because people don't know, because people don't collect blackberries anymore.
Whereas the American uses petticoat and uses blackberries. The American, yes.
Yeah, well, the American speech is far more archaic and is far closer to Elizabethan English than ours is. There's for instance, ain't, if we're talking words, ain't, which is considered slang in this country, ain't is a perfectly respectable word and was a word by itself. It's not a shortening of anything. Ain't is a word by itself. It ain't a shortening. And so
it ain't wrong.
Let's get back to the story. I'm sure I was telling a story there somewhere. Yes, so I'm making this petticoat, said Mum. When it is finished, all our troubles will be over. In the meantime, tell him you can't marry him until he brings you a dress of white satin with gold leaves on it the size of a man's hand, and it must fit perfectly. Surrender to me, Mum says, can't marry you till you bring me a dress of white satin, gold leaves on it the size of a man's hand, and it must fit perfectly. Well, he took a measure and off he went. A week later, his back, you know exactly what he had. Dress of white satin, gold leaves on the sized man's hand, and it fitted perfectly. Ma! Don't worry, she said. I've nearly finished the petticoat. In the meantime, tell him you can't marry him till he brings you a dress of silk, the colour of the birds of the sky, and it must fit perfectly. Grandad says, me mum says, I can't marry you till you bring me a dress of silk, colour of the bird of the sky, and it must fit perfectly. Off he goes, and a week later he's back. You know exactly what he's got. Dress of silk, colour of the bird of the sky, and it fits perfectly. Mum! Don't worry, she said. I've nearly finished the petticoat. In the meantime, tell him you can't marry him until he brings you a pair of silver slippers, neither too big or too small. They must fit perfectly. And I'm very impressed that you still cough into your arm, though, even though you're sitting by yourself, Alistair. So in Grandad says, my mum says I can't marry you to bring me a pair of silver slippers, neither too big or too small. They must fit perfectly. Well, he looked at her 3-inch feet and off he went. And a week later he was back. And what did he have but a pair of silver slippers, neither too big or too small? They fitted perfectly. Don't worry, she said, but I nearly finished the petticoat. Meanwhile, tell him if he meet you outside the church at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, you'll be married. Well, Mum hadn't steered her wrong yet, but she was a bit worried now. She went down and said, me mum says, if you meet me outside the church at 10 o'clock tomorrow, we'll be married. He's happy, he's laughing, he's doing cartwheels down the street. Meanwhile, she's back upstairs. Mum, what have you done to me? Don't worry, she said. I've finished the petticoat. And it wasn't any ordinary petticoat, but it was a petticoat of moss with gold threads running through it. And Mum knew a thing or two about the future, told her to put on a mossy petticoat. Over the top of it, she put her dirtiest, grottiest working clothes. She would take her best clothes, put them in a bundle under her arms and wish herself 100 miles away. When she got there, she was to walk till she came to a big house. She was to knock on the front door and ask for a job. Well, just like you all would, or at least you, cute Sir, Mr. President, King Louis Lindsay Timmins. She did exactly what her mother told her. She put on a mossy petticoat. Over the top of it, she put her dirtiest, grottiest working clothes. She took her best clothes, put them in a bundle under her arm, and wished herself 100 miles away. When she got there, she walked till she came to a big house. She knocked on the front door. It was opened by the mistress. Yes, she said. What can I do? Okay, I'd like a job, said Mussycoat. And what can you do, said the mistress. I'm the best cook in the world, said Mussycoat. I've already got a cook, said the mistress. I'll tell you what, you can be the undercook, the cook's assistant. Well, in those days, the best job in the house was the cook's, and the second best was the undercook. And no way were they going to let this little travelling girl come in off the street and take the second best job in the kitchen. So as soon as the mistress was out of the way, the other servants gave her all the nasty jobs to do. Cleaning out the fireplace, cleaning the grease from the pan. They wouldn't even let her wash, and she soon had dirt from the tip of her toes to the tip of her nose. Well, life carried on like this for some time, till news came of a great dance that was to last 3 nights. And the first night, the mistress invited Mussycoat up to her room. There, all the other servants thought she was going to get the sack, she was going to lose her job. But when she got up there, the mistress said, Mussycoat, would you like to come to the dance with myself, the master, and our son? Mussycoat said, thank you kindly, ma'am, but look at the state of me. If I sat in your fine carriage, I'd make the seats all greasy and nasty and disgusting. And if any fine gentleman sat next to me, I'd make his silk suit all greasy and nasty. Thank you kindly, ma'am, but I can't. She went back downstairs. What did the mistress want, said the servants. Well, actually, she invited me to the dance, said Mussycoat. Liar, they said. And they hit her on the head with skillets. Now, if I'd been in the United States or Canada, I wouldn't have to explain what a skillet is. But here, I do, which it is a cast iron frying pan. And, well, that's as near it is the short description. And yeah, that'll do. Now we could have discussion on semantics here, Alistair, but without that, the shorthand, it's a cast iron frying pan. And so there's would you agree, Babasi? Thank you. As a user of such an implement. Well, the next day, the same thing happened again. Again, she was called a liar, and again, she was hit on the head with skillets. Well, as you can understand, by this time, she's getting a little bit upset. So by an enchantment, by magic, she put all the servants to sleep. She went upstairs, she put on a mossy petticoat, a dress of white satin, gold leaves on the sides of a man's hand, and her silver slippers, and she wished herself at the dance. She danced all night with the mistress's son. Whenever she was asked where she came from, all she'd say was she came from a place where they hit her on the head with skillets. Well, at the end of the dance, she made her excuses and she went out the corridor. She wished herself back to the big house. She woke up all the other servants. Whatever happened to us, they said, "Oh, you've been asleep." She said, "Oh, please don't tell the mistress." They said, "Do have this pair of stockings. Do have this bar of soap. Do have next week's money." They were kind to her for 5 minutes. But the next day, when the same thing happened again they called her a liar. And again, they hit her on the head with skillets. Now, Alistair, of course, would say that a skillet should be made of pottery and fired and so forth, because there's a... How would you describe a skillet, Alistair?
I always thought it was flatter than a frying pan. A skillet, and then you suspend it over the fire, and it's a flat pan. Then you can do.
No, a skillet has a rim, and
yeah, but not like a.
Now it depends what you're using.
Actually, there are two types of skillets.
Ah.
And there is now almost flat skillet that you fix Hoppin' John on, which is kind of like a pancake.
Yeah.
And then you have the skillet that's more popularly known that has the rim and it's like a frying pan and it lasts forever unless I own it. I've had two that broke on me and no one believes that. But there are two types of skillets. Now I'm going back to being quiet.
Right. So if you're a traveller, and you'd hang a skillet on a kettle hook over the fire, but that would be one that had a rim on. So it would be the handle would be just anyway. That's not the point. The point is they kept hitting her with these things. So once more, she put them to sleep. This time she went upstairs. She put on a mossy petticoat, a dress of silk, the colour of the birds of the sky, and her silver slipper, and she wished herself at the dance. She danced all night with the mistress's son. Whenever she was asked where she came from, all she'd say was she came from a place where they hit her on the head with skillets. But at the end of the dance, she tried to get away, but he was one of those boys they held on too tight. So I'll forget this. And she just wished herself away from the middle of his arms. And as she disappeared, his hand must have just touched her foot, for one silver slipper fell off. Back at the big house, once more, she woke up the servants. And once more, they gave her a present, so she wouldn't tell the mistress. But the mistress's son, he couldn't sleep. "Mom, I'm in love. Mom, I've got to find her. Mom, can't stand it." "Neither can I," said Mum. "And if it'll keep you quiet, we'll get all the girls to land and we'll try the silver slipper on each of them." They tried it on, well, it fitted none. And the only one who hadn't tried it on was Mossycoat. And of course, as soon as she tried it on, it fitted perfectly. He's about to take her in his arms. "Hold on," she said. And she went upstairs and came down in a dress of white satin, gold leaves on the size of a man's hand. He's about to take her in his arms again. "Hold on," she said. Then she went upstairs and came down in a dress of silk, the colour of the birds of the sky. This time he'd learned his lesson, and he asked her story, and she told him those parts she wanted him to hear. But she said nothing about being hit on the head with skillets. "The one thing I don't understand," he said, "you said you came from a place where they hit you on the head with skillets." But she said not a word. She just looked round at all the other servants, and the master and mistress and their son understood perfectly. And those servants were driven from the house by the dogs. And there were new servants employed, and there was a great wedding, and a great deal to eat, and even more to drink. And of course, had you been there, each and every one of you would have been invited. Wipe end, story end. Now, I've been telling that story for years. And I was in a school in Derby, and nearly all the children in front of me had Bangladeshi parents, and they were all wearing their own clothes, their own clothes, or Bangladesh as national clothes. So no school uniform. And I looked out, and every piece of clothing in that story was sitting in that classroom. And so I talked about, you know, that it would take how stories travel. And I talked about that it's only 13 hours by plane for them to go back to Bangladesh. But if you had to walk, which was northern India, was where the Rom came from originally, or the Dom and the Lom that became the Rom, as far as we know. And so they'd walk for 100 miles. They'd walk for a year, and they'd come to such and such place. They'd walk for 100 years, and they'd come to such and such place. And they'd sit around the fire, and they would tell stories. And the stories would be taken from that land and stories where they came from. And they walk for, and they'd eventually get to Britain in about 1500. And but what had remained in the stories was the detail in the stories of the clothing, whichever they clothed, but they'd clothed whichever story they'd picked up on the way. And it was a lovely it was a lovely example. I took a globe and talked about people movement and so forth. So it was a really lovely moment. And it's pretty well the end of this lovely moment. So who have we got? And talking of India, we've got Usha next week, Usha Burton, and she's telling stories next week for the first time, I think, or maybe it's certainly the first Friday. It's not the first time she's told on the thing, but I think it's the first Friday she's done. So that's on the 13th, and on the 20th, there's Rona Barber. Rona Barber's doing stories, and then on Christmas Eve during the day, we've got Stories for Christmas, which David Heathfield is working on with Simona. So meanwhile, thank you, Waleed, for flying the magic carpet, and Omar, and thank you everyone. Duke Sir King Louis, President King Lindsay Timmons. I hope you have a very fine week, and the rest of you have a lovely week. If I don't see you before, I'm going to be probably running around on a steam train dressed in a red suit for between now and Christmas. So if I don't see you between now, have a wonderful holiday, everyone. Have a great Christmas, New Year, etc., etc. I shall probably get on at least to announce things before then. But and Omar's just coming back, so thank you, Omar, for minding the fort, holding the fort. He's doing great stuff in the cafe, in our physical cafe. Omar is doing, I hear fantastic things about him in the cafe. So thank you, Omar. And I hope you're feeling better than you did yesterday.
And a happy Kwanzaa to all.
And yeah, then Kwanzaa, yes, and on a later one, nearer Kwanzaa, Baba C will explain what Kwanzaa is for those that don't know. But there's so fare thee well, everyone. Thank you for attending. Thank you for listening.
Very well.